Talita, please.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for coming. I am thrilled and delighted that all those people have come to this talk about a book on a Thursday evening. So I'm really, really happy. I'm really honored that you guys are here to talk about books with me. And not just any book, right? Moby Dick. It's one of my favorite books, and I love it. I love talking about it. So I'm gonna try to be like as objective and straightforward as possible. But if I start getting like confusing, or if I start rambling, or if I'm talking too quick, please tell me on the chat and I can try to control my pace, okay? All right, here we go. I'm gonna share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Great. So here we go. The name of this talk is Importance and Cultural Impact of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. And before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, because I know some of you have already been to Juan's talks and Enrique's talks. So who am I, right? Well, my name is Talita Takeda. As you can see, I have a bachelor degree in classical music and also a master's degree in communication and semiotics. And well, I'm taking my second degree in languages, English, surprise. I've been teaching at Alumni since 2018, and I teach English, and also I am a teacher at the high school program where I teach American and British literature, as well as fine arts. So you guys can tell I really enjoy talking about books, right? Well, so today's agenda, I would like to tell you a little bit about Herman Melville in general, and then give you some context of the American literature of the time. Then talk a little bit about Moby Dick's plot and structure, which is going to be a challenge because I don't know if you know it, but it is like a 600-page book. It's a mammoth. It's a very, very big book. So I'm going to try to be concise, and also about the impact, right? So it's something that like everybody knows Moby Dick, everybody's heard of Moby Dick, but what's it actually about and how did it become so like impactful and important, right? Very good. Guys, I wanted to like have a trivia moment with you guys. I tried to use the Zoom tool here to make it, easier. However, I wasn't very successful. I'm so sorry. So I'm going to try to do it on the chat. Okay, let's see if it works. So this is my first question here for you. Let me see if I can manage. Take a look at the chat if you guys can, please. And my question is, which famous books were published in the same decade as Moby Dick? So I am going to give you some options. I'm going to have to stop sharing. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just going to use the chat here. This is option number one, letter A. I'm going to call it A. Oh, sorry. I pasted the same one. Sorry, guys. Teachers having technical trouble here. This is option A, sorry. So we have Flaubert's Madame Bovary, Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, and Baudelaire's The Flowers of Evil. So if you think Moby Dick was published in this decade when those books came out, you can choose letter A. Option B is Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, José de Alencar Senhora, and Mark Twain's The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. So if you think Moby Dick was published along with all these books, please choose option B. Option C is, why did it? I'm sorry, guys. This is option C. So we have Machado de Assis' Dom Casmurro, Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, or Bram Stoker's Dracula. And option D is Baum's The Wizard of Oz, Doyle's The Hound of the Baskervilles, and Essa de Queiroz' A Cidade das Serras. So when was Moby Dick published? please answer on the chat A, B, C, or D. It's okay to make mistakes. Nobody's judging. I just want to know what you guys think. If you're self-conscious, you can send it as a private message to me. Okay, so we have one vote for a letter A. Okay, one letter C, two letter C, two letter A. Okay. Any other guesses? One more C. Okay, so three letter C. I'm going to give you 5 seconds, guys, so we don't take too long here. One more letter A. Okay, 3 to A, 4 to A. Okay, and 3 to C. Last chance. Last chance. Okay, one letter B. Interesting. Okay, time is up, guys. Thank you so much for participating. So basically, letter A is the winner, right? Then we have letter C followed by letter B. Interesting. Can you guys see my screen again? All right, great. So I've divided those books into those decades. So the first decade would be the 1850s, where we have all these books. Then we have the 1870s, then the 1890s, and then the 1900s. Guys, most of you said Moby Dick was published in this first group, and you guys are absolutely correct. So that was really interesting. I didn't think you would get this one because I think when we think of Moby Dick and we think of those other books, Moby Dick is wildly different from the others, right? So it would make sense to put this book into the 1900s group, right? So that's why I just wanted to see if you guys knew it. Well, but if you know a little bit about Moby Dick, then you know it was published in the mid 19th century, right? So let's talk a little bit about Herman Melville, today's author. He was born in New York City in 1819, and I think it's very relevant that he was born in New York City because New York City is probably one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world. It's a melting pot of different cultures and different influences and ethnicities. It's very effervescent, and that's the context where Melville was born, and that is going to influence his work a lot. He was born at a very privileged family, but his father died when he was very, very young. So he very soon had to work to provide for his family. And one of the jobs that he took on was actually a sailor, first for a merchant ship and then for a whaling ship. So a ship to hunt whales, right? And he believed the ocean had something magical and mystical. And don't get me wrong, a lot of other authors talked about the ocean and sea voyages before Melville, but I think he had a very unique way of talking about the ocean and seeing those sea voyages, right? So Moby Dick gets published in the middle of the 19th century, as you know, right? So it was published in 1851. So I have another question for you. I would like you to tell me if you know how many copies did Moby Dick sell in 1851? So I'm going to give you the options, all right? Here's question number 2. I hope you can see it on the chat. So how many copies did Moby Dick sell in 1851? Option A is 3,215 copies. Option B is 10,840 copies. Option C is, there we go. Let me try to do this again. Sorry, guys. Option C is 210,435 copies. And finally, option D is 1,098,145 copies. Just to give you like an idea, if we think of, for example, Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, the year it came out, they sold 100,000 copies. So just to give you some parameter, because I know it's pretty, abstract. Okay, 10 seconds. Choose an alternative and send it up over on the chat, please. Okay, 1 vote for letter B. 1 vote for letter A. Okay, 2 votes for letter C. 1 more for A, so we have, okay, 3 people saying A, 3 people saying C, and 1 for letter B. Okay, 1 more C. All right, so C is winning. Great. Okay, guys, the correct answer is letter A. The year it was published, it only sold around 3,000 copies. And this is a big publishing flop. Just to give you like reference, if we think about the bestsellers, for example, Harry Potter, the year Harry Potter came out, it sold more than 5 million copies. And for example, the Da Vinci Code, I don't know if you remember, the Da Vinci Code in 2003 sold more than 25 million. So selling 3,000 books the year of its release is really a big, big failure, right? Nobody really understood and liked Moby Dick. No, neither the public nor the critics. So Melville was very frustrated because he really believed he was onto something with Moby Dick. He really believed his work. And so, because he was so angry, he wrote a text called Pierre to excoriate the literary publishing world. And this backlashed even more, right? And he kind of became a joke, like, who is this author? Who's this writer, right? And he was so frustrated that he gave up writing. So he spent the rest of his life. So imagine, Moby Dick was published in 1851. He died in 1891. So that's 40 years of this genius not writing, not putting his work out there, just stuck in a very bureaucratic work at the customs. And he died very unhappy and with no recognition, right? Actually, when his obituary came out in the newspaper, people were actually surprised that he died because they thought he had already been dead for a while, right? Nobody was talking about Herman Melville. So what happens is, more than 100 years later, in the aftermath of World War II, well, the U.S. is now a global influence, it's a global power, right? And they want to impose, like they want to prove the world that they have good arts, that they have good literature, right? And in that context, they start finding some of Melville's old writings. So they find, like in the 1920s, they find this short story called Billy Budd, and they decide to republish it, and it's a big hit. And then somebody finds Moby Dick again and says, let me take a look at this. And in the 20th century, we have a movement in literature which is called modernism, which kind of believes that if fiction is going to be good, it has to be hard. It has to be intellectually difficult and sophisticated. And Moby Dick was all that. So there you have it. Suddenly you have an American classic, which is a modernistic masterpiece, which was written more than 100 years before modernism. So people start getting fascinated by it, and we have what we call the Melville revival. And it's thanks to that that we know who he is, and we love Moby Dick to this day, right? And that's interesting because Melville really liked literature and American literature in general, of course. And he had this very, very big admiration towards Nathaniel Hawthorne. Nathaniel Hawthorne was this big name in American literature in the 19th century. He was pretty much renowned and recognized as one of the best American authors. He wrote the Scarlet Letter and Young Goodman Brown. And Melville started like corresponding with him, and he wanted to meet him in person. And it's interesting that once you read the letters, they're borderline romantic. It's like he had this platonic love. And Hawthorne replied the letters, and he was actually kind of enthusiastic about the process of Moby Dick. He was curious to see what was going to come out of it, but I don't think he quite admired Melville as, Melville did. So it was kind of like this unrequited admiration, something, kind of sad. And Melville was such a fanboy that he actually dedicated Moby Dick to Nathaniel Hawthorne. So this is the first page. Let me see if I can get a pointer here. This is a meme, like how much, just to see how much, Melville admired Hawthorne. But this is the first page, the very first page of the book. After the cover of Moby Dick, this is what you see. In token of my admiration for his genius, this book is inscribed to Nathaniel Hawthorne. Guys, you'll see later on that Moby Dick is not just a book about a whale. It is an homage to the American literature. And it starts right off the bat. So the very first page is a dedication to Nathaniel Hawthorne, who was at the time the most important American author, right? And you'll see like glimpses of what like how Melville perceived this American literature throughout the book, and it's unbelievable. It's amazing. And we have to remember, guys, that back in the 19th century, what we have in terms of American literature is basically what developed from Puritan literature, right? So sermons and something very didactic and serious, something that did not have the intention of entertaining people. So this tradition of literary fiction is kind of starting in the 19th century, right? And if we compare what was going on then with the rest of the world, they didn't think that America could sit at the same table at those big boys and girls. So if we take France, they had Victor Hugo. If we take the UK, they had Shakespeare. If we take Germany, they have Goethe. And who does the US have, right? So well, if you appreciate a Mean Girls reference there, that's what I wanted to convey here, right? So it's like, okay, so what is America doing, right? And well, that's the context where when Melville decides to start writing his novel, Moby Dick, right? He wants to talk about whale hunt. Remember, he was actually a sailor on board of a whaling ship, so he knew how the process worked. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. So I wanted to show you how it worked. Like, I'm not by any means an expert, but I kind of know a little bit. So basically, they had those huge ships because it was really hard to hunt whales. So they had to endure storms and, sea storms, whatever. So they had those very big ships. And attached to those ships, we have those little boats. So once they spotted a whale, a whale is a huge animal, right? So they had to go like off the ship, the big ship, and onto those little boats. And there were some very like key figures in the crew, which were called harpooners. This is a harpoon. This is a very old weapon that they use to actually kill the whales. So it has like this piercing part here, and then it has a long rope. So the crew spots a whale. They go down those little boats, and the harpooners are going to throw the harpoons and try to reach some part of the body of the whale. The whale is going to try to swim away very quickly. So what the crew has to do is really grab the rope and hold on tight and do not let it go, because the whale is going to be tired and so hurt after a while that it's going to slow down and stop. When that happens, that's when you kill the whale, right? And then they were usually so huge that they had to be like cut into pieces and attached to the sides of the ship. That was like really, really crazy, right? So that's how it works, just to give you some context. And why were they hunting those poor whales, right? Well, back in the 19th century, there was something very, very precious inside the whales, especially those sperm whales. They have this kind of like a square head. This is called a spermaceti, or a sperm oil. This is a type of oil that the whale produces. And back then, during the Industrial Revolution, it was used as fuel for indoors and outdoors lighting and candles before they had like those wax candles. So it was very, very precious. But then once the petrol and wax candles were like better developed, they stopped using those spermaceti and thankfully stopped hunting whales, those poor whales, right? But back then it was very, very important. And it was a very dangerous mission because those whales were very huge and powerful and strong, right? So more often than not, those whaling ships did not return, or they returned with a very reduced crew compared to what the amount of people who took off. So yeah. Anyway, so Melville is working on board those whaling ships and he is listening to stories. This is a guy who's absolutely passionate about stories, right? And on one of his journeys, he meets this guy who is said to be the nephew of Owen Chase. And he starts telling Melville the story of Owen Chase. This is Owen Chase, guys. This guy here was the captain or the first mate of a ship, a very important ship called the Essex. And what they say is that this Essex was out in the Pacific Ocean hunting for whales when they spot a huge sperm whale. So the whole crew just alights from the big ship. They are already on the little boats, ready to attack the whale. However, what they see is like they imagine that the whale has some kind of anger towards the ship because the whale intentionally, in their words, attacks the big ships, destroying it, and then is able to swim away unscathed, unharmed. So everybody, like from the crew, is absolutely stranded on those little boats with nowhere to go. They have no provisions because everything was on the big ship, right? The big ship is wrecked. So what do? This is the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This is the middle of nowhere. And just to give you like some numbers, they were like around 2,000 kilometers from some Polynesian islands and 5,000 kilometers from the American coast, which would be like the closest part would be like the, a part of South America close to Peru. And they are on those little boats that they have to row, right? They have to use like human power to move. So they think, okay, the most logical thing would be to go to those Polynesian islands, right? Which are like 2,000 kilometers from where they are. But the sailors had heard that there were cannibals living on those little islands. So that is really a big problem, right? So they don't want to meet the cannibals. So they decided to take the other way. So just to row their boats for 5,000 kilometers until they reach the coast of America. However, I told you they didn't have any provisions, right? So people start starving to death. They die of starvation. So what do you think the crew does in order to survive? Please send me your ideas on the chat. What do? People are starving to death. There's no food, and you still have to row your boat to reach the coast. What do? Don't be afraid, guys. Just send me your ideas on the chat. No guesses? Oh, come on. Don't be shy. They could fish, yeah. For some reason, they couldn't. It was probably a very yes, Hosanna, exactly. They started eating each other. Yes. So those people who died, the corpses, they became food. So isn't it ironic that in their attempt to escape from the cannibals, they wanted to escape cannibalism, they ended up becoming cannibals, right? So Melville is absolutely fascinated by those stories, and he's like, "Oh, I have to write something about it." And he is going to use this as inspiration for his big fiction, his big novel, right? And we are going to see cannibals, actually one specific cannibal, but he's going to be presented like right off the bat. He's going to be one of the most important characters in the book, right? So I'm just going to go over the plot very, very quickly because I don't want to bore you and we don't have a lot of time. But what is the plot like? What happens in the story? So the exposition goes like this. This is the very beginning of the book. I'm going to read it out for you just because I think it's too beautiful to just, go over it. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it for you. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coughing warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's heads off, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. All right. So there's a lot here to unpack. I mean, this is the very first paragraph of the book, right? I want to start by the very first sentence, right? Call me Ishmael. So right off the bat, we know that we are going to hear the story from the point of view of this first person point of view, right? And this guy here who is narrating the story, he's telling us to see, he's actually asking us or commanding us to call him Ishmael. He doesn't start by saying, my name is Ishmael or I'm Ishmael. No, he says, call me Ishmael. So is that his real name? Like, is that how he prefers to be called? And how can we, like, is this narrator reliable? Like, if we don't even know for sure that that's his name, can we really trust him, right? And not only that, he's telling us that he's very depressed, right? He's growing grim about the mouth. He feels like this grim, drizzly November in his soul. And he is actually deciding to go to the ocean because this is his substitute to pistol and ball. Like going on a crazy suicidal mission to hunt a whale is a better way for him than just, using a gun to take his own life. Oh my God. So what are we about to see, right? Okay, let's move on. So Ishmael, he's from New York City, just as Melville, right? I told you cosmopolitanism, that's going to be important, like different influences, nationalities, ethnicities, etc. And he knows that a lot of whaling ships they actually go to the sea from the Nantucket port. So he travels to Nantucket to choose a boat where to work. And then when he gets there, he needs a place to sleep, right? He gets there in the evening and he needs to find a ship the next morning. So he realizes the whole city is packed, is full because the boats are about to go, right? To set sail. But he finds this inn called this Powder Inn, and the innkeeper tells him, I don't have like an available room all for yourself, but if you don't mind sharing, there's a guy here who wouldn't mind sharing the room. And he's like, okay, yeah, maybe I can do that. But then he realizes he's actually going to have to share a bed with this guy. So, if you guys are familiar with literature in general, there's a very, very common trope called there was only one bed, which is basically a strategy that authors use, usually in romantic contexts, but Melville is doing it here maybe for the first time, I don't know, but in order to consolidate a friendship. So Ishmael realizes that he's going to have to share a bed with this huge guy who is from some Pacific island. His whole body is covered in tattoos. He's probably a cannibal. He was selling some mummified heads around the town, and he smokes a pipe, like some tomahawk thing. But he decides to, you know what, I'll give it a go. I'll sleep with this cannibal and let's see what happens. He says, better sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian. And that's how funny Melville is, right? He's very witty. He has those like epigrams and funny things that he says throughout the book. And then he's well, the morning after, he ends up saying that this was one of the best nights that's the night he best slept in his life. So he had a wonderful sleep with Queequeg. And Queequeg, the cannibal, is going to become one of Ishmael's closest friends, right? There's another sentence from the book I love, which is when he talks about where Queequeg comes from, right? We don't know which island Queequeg comes from, but he says it is not down on any map. True places never are. So that's Melville saying, look, I cannot like point out and identify which exact island Queequeg comes from, but that doesn't matter, right? True places are never physical places, maybe, right? So I find this really, really beautiful. It gives me the goosebumps. Like Melville's writing is that beautiful. Anyway, so Queequeg is a harpooner and he's looking for a ship to work at as well. So they go together to the port and they see this boat that they find interesting, which is called the Pequod. That's the name of the ship, right? Pequod spelled with a D at the end. This is a way for Melville to honor Native Americans because Pequot, spelled with a T at the end, was actually a Native American tribe which occupied what is Connecticut nowadays. So it is, you'll see some references to Native American culture throughout the book. So as I told you, Moby Dick is an homage to American literature. So you'll see bits and pieces of the ethnicities that come together to form American literature. So in the Rising Action, they start working at the Pequod, and they haven't heard of the captain yet. They've heard rumors, but the captain hasn't shown up yet, so they haven't met him. So the Pequod set sails with supplies for a 3-year hunt. So that's a lot of whales, right? And a lot of time. There's no word from the captain yet. We have only hints and rumors. He seems to be a very scary guy. And people say that he doesn't have one of his legs. He has a peg leg, but it's actually not a wooden peg leg. He uses a whale bone instead of like a peg leg or a prosthetic leg, and that he's very like broody and grumpy, and he has a lot of scars on his face. We haven't met Captain Ahab yet, but we have met the other crew members. So we have here Starbuck, which is the religious and cautious first mate and the voice of reason. We have our friend Queequeg, a mysterious harpooner who becomes friends with Ishmael. We have Dagu, who is an incredibly strong African harpooner. Ishmael, our narrator, right? A very educated but poor sailor from New York City looking for an adventure. And Tashtego, a proud Native American harpooner. So look at that, guys. This is the cast of characters. And this is a novel from the 19th century. Look how much representativeness and diversity and like cultural representation. And we're talking about a novel from 1851. That is just so crazy, right? And of course, this is also a way for Melville to say, hey, this is America, right? It's not just the descendants from European ethnicities, it's everybody. Well, we finally meet Captain Ahab in chapter 28. So that's 28 chapters that we just hear about him, and we finally meet him, and he's everything that we were expecting, right? So he is this guy who has only one leg, and we know that one of his legs is actually missing because a whale bit it. A whale bit it off, right? He was attacked. Okay, well, we realize in chapter 36 that the whole reason why the Pequod set sail was not to make profits using whales per Massetti. It was actually because Captain Ahab never really recovered from these injury, right, of the whale taking off his leg. So he wants revenge. What he wants is to kill the whale that took off one of his legs. And he tells that to the crew by offering a gold coin. So he nails a gold coin to the flag, to the mast of the ship, and he says, whoever spots Moby Dick, whoever sees Moby Dick is going to get this coin as a reward. And that coin is a lot of money if you consider like the type of salaries that the crew members were receiving. That would be a lot more than what they were promised. So everybody in the crew decides to look for the whale, right? Because well, that's a lot of a big incentive, right? And this is a scene from SpongeBob, just to start showing you that it has a very, very big influence in pop culture, right? Well, we meet some other characters, right? We have Moby Dick, a white whale. It is infamous and dangerous and considered by Ahab the incarnation of evil and fated nemesis. So it is like this personification of evil, and it is an animal, right? But Captain Ahab is seeing like human intentions and motivations in this poor animal, right? And Captain Ahab is this egomaniacal captain of the Pequod, and he lost his leg to Moby Dick and persuades his crew to actually hunt the whale. And we have this other character, Fadala, that I'm not going to say much about him because it's not going to be relevant here for our discussion. Days go by, weeks go by, we see giant squids, we see Tashtego falling down a whale head and almost dying, and Queequeg having to rescue him. We hear stories of Polynesian natives that use whale bones to create beautiful temples decorated with plants. And Queequeg gets sick at some point, and he believes he's going to die. So he asks people to build him a coffin, but he ends up being okay. Like after a while, he was okay. So the coffin was just there, right? Well, they finally spot Moby Dick. So in the climax, we see Moby Dick. So people go down the little boats in order to hunt it. However, the whale is way more powerful than anybody else and kills everybody, including Captain Ahab, who gets stuck on the rope of the harpoon and dies. The only person to survive is Ishmael, because he found Queequeg's coffin and used it as a rowboat. So in the falling action, we see Ishmael being able to escape, right, inside Queequeg's coffin. And in the resolution, he is rescued by another ship. So that is the story of Moby Dick, like in a very summarized version. But Moby Dick is not just that, guys. I like to call Moby Dick a crazy lasagna because the narrative bits are actually interspersed with a lot of non-narrative bits. The book actually starts with two chapters that are not the narrative. So Call Me Ishmael only happens after two chapters. The first thing is called etymology. Then we have biblical references. I'm going to show you some examples. Then we have the narrative. Then we have a compendium about whale art. Then we have another part of the narrative. Then we have biological explanations, then another part of the narrative. And then how to hunt a whale. It's like crazy, you know, you go back and forth in the narrative with those things. This is how the book starts, etymology. It's basically a list of the word whale in different languages. And then we go to those extracts, which is basically like extracts from the Bible and other old books that mention sea monsters and whales. So I wonder if that didn't put the readers off in the 19th century. You know, when you go to a bookstore and you start flipping a book and just to see if you're going to like it, you just see this like etymology, extracts, what is going on here? And they just give up the reading, which is a shame, right? Because Moby Dick has a lot. I told you it's an homage to American literature. So we have some very philosophical chapters, just like the whiteness of the whale. Like he's going to like try to understand the color, like this whiteness, right? This chapter is super crazy because it's about the whale's penis. Like before that, I had never thought that the whales even had a penis, right? But somehow it works and it all makes up this amazing masterpiece, right? I have here, oh my God, I'm speaking too much, right, guys? It's um so yes, how much time do I have? Can anybody help me? Because I'm kind of lost here. I just want to show you some of the examples.
Talita, go ahead. You still have
Yeah.
like 10 minutes, okay? Don't worry.
Oh, fantastic. 10 minutes is going to be wonderful. So here I have one edition of Moby Dick, which is really, really nice if you guys are interested in reading it. So as I told you, she is big. She is a mammoth, 700 pages. This is the Antofágica edition with a translation by Rogério Galindo. Really nice because Rogério Galindo attempted to have like a more accessible translation. He didn't want to be like very sophisticated or academic. He wanted it to be like, you know, something that everybody could start reading. And we have some beautiful illustrations. Let me show you. Look at that. So the map with the route of the Pequod. We have the Pequod itself. Beautiful, beautiful. I believe last year, Zahar also launched a different translation by Bruno Gambarotto, which is seems to be really nice. I haven't read it, but also nice. This is a more like pop version, if you guys are interested. This is from Chaboté. He is a graphic novelist. So this is actually a graphic novel. Look at this. Beautiful. So of course, in this version here, we only have the plot and not the non-narrative bits. So you wouldn't have like the thorough, you know, whole of Moby Dick, but it's still maybe a first contact, right? So you guys can get in touch with it. So just to conclude, guys, I promise, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the cultural impact, right? Because it is one of the most relevant masterpieces in world literature. One of the examples I can think of, like, you know, off the top of my head is Starbucks coffee, the coffee shop. So the name comes from Starbucks, the first made of the Pequod, right? And it seems that when they started the company in Seattle, they wanted the company's name to suggest something related to seafare, to ships, and also to something that was very American. So that's why it's Starbucks. Uh, Another thing is this song by Led Zeppelin, right? The band. It's called Moby Dick, and I'm just gonna play like a few seconds so you know which song I'm talking about.
Interesting featuring.
I'm sorry, guys. The audio is a little weird here, but you know, you can search for it later on YouTube or Spotify. But this is a song that has a very big solo. The drummer, John Bohan, has a very big solo, a very long solo. And it seems like his son nicknamed it Moby Dick because it was a long track. So this video is like 15 minutes long, right? It's a long track. So that's why it's Moby Dick, because it's very, very long. This guy here, I don't know if you're familiar with him. His name is Moby. He's a singer, songwriter, and animal rights activist. He's actually the great, 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 great son of Herman Melville. That's why his artistic name is Moby. This is Blue Moby Dick by Jackson Pollock. This is an example, like in TV, Moby Dick is like, oh my God, full of references, right? This is from Family Guy, but I've shown you the one from SpongeBob. There's a Simpsons episode, of course. refer to Moby Dick. We have Futurama episode about it, so a lot. And I think the most recent one I can think of is The Whale. This movie was released pretty recently by Aronofsky, starring Brendan Fraser, right? And he's actually, I don't know if you guys have seen it, he's actually a literature teacher, right? And he has a daughter, and the daughter wrote an essay about Moby Dick. So yeah, lots of references to the book and parallels that we can make with the story of the guy and Moby Dick. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for listening, to me talk for so long. So I want to hear from you guys. Has anyone here ever read Moby Dick? Please tell me on the chat. Nobody. Oh, hi, Fabi. Good to see you too. What about Moby Dick? Have you read it? Nobody has. Oh, that's curious. Would you like to? How are you feeling about it now? Would you guys like to take up this challenge? 700 pages. Ooh, Juliana's planning to do it. Nice, Ju. I can lend you my book if you want. You should read it in English though, right? This is a public domain, so you can actually find it online for free. So read it in English. It's a great exercise. Who else, guys? More impressions, things you want to share? How are you feeling about this? Questions? Does anybody have questions? Oh, yes, Anita. 700 pages is a big challenge. Yes. Unfortunately not. I saw a black and white movie about 8 years ago. Oh, Lilian, that's really interesting. I haven't watched any of the movie adaptations besides The Whale, which is not really an adaptation, right? It's just reference. But I feel like I don't know if I would enjoy it, like an adaptation, because you don't have the non-narrative bits, right? So I don't know. I don't know. Anna saying not yet, but I feel like reading it after this class. Congrats, Danny. Thank you so much, Anna. I'm glad I could inspire you a little bit. Anybody else? Questions? Do you feel like now you can understand some of the references to Moby Dick that you've seen? Maybe you've read a story about obsession and could like draw some parallels with Moby Dick. I enjoyed getting to know more about it. Oh, thanks, Lydian. I'm happy. And I think Captain Ahab is one of those characters that we see depicted in a lot of other characters, right? Because he's so like full of personality. And after Melville, I can see a lot of Captain Ahabs out there, even if they're not captains at all, right? Hosanna saying that, Talita, thanks for your explanation. Oh, no problem. Do you have any questions? I think so. Would anybody like to say something? You guys can talk too.
Hi, Talita. So can I talk?
Go ahead, of course.
Yes. I'll tell you, I never read it because I feel a little bit afraid about animal rights. I'm so into defending animals, so I'm afraid of reading that. Like this guy. I know it's about more obsession than a whale itself, but like I'm gonna feel for the whale. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
they like defending animals and all that. I feel like, oh, I can't read a book about a guy that wants, wants to kill a whale no matter what, that doesn't make sense. That never made sense for me. But now when you're talking about like, let's look at it with an obsession view of the story, like when you're obsessed about something, that's really interesting. But it's still, I'm still like, not very comfortable about reading the story of somebody wanting so much to kill an animal. I don't know if you guys feel like that. I know it's your favorite book. I know you love it. I'm so sorry about that.
No, don't worry. It's okay. It's really okay. And I think you have a point, because in their search for Moby Dick, along the way, they kill a lot of whales and big fishes and other animals because, well, it is part of what they had to do there, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think that's an important content warning, like an important trigger warning, because if you're like sensitive to that, it may not be as enjoyable for you, even though at the end the whale wins, right? Because the whale
Yes.
is able to kill the whole crew and all. But yeah, another thing I was thinking about while you were speaking, it was that this was actually written in the 19th century, while the literary movement that was going on is what we call Romanticism. And in Romanticism, they had a very idealized view on nature. So you read poems, for example, from I don't know, if you think about the UK, you'll see like Percy Shelley and Lord Byron, Samuel, what's his name? I forget now, but they are all writing about nature with this idealized view, almost like in a worshiping manner. They worship nature as if it was a god, right? And they feel kind of like overwhelmed by the power of nature and how little we are, right? If we compare ourselves to like nature itself as a force. And I think maybe Melville had something to say about this. This is not a book about nature, right? I think this is a book about obsession at the same time that it is like an homage to American literature. But the ocean and the whale, right? They are really unforgiving. They are forces to be reckoned. And if we think about it from this like romanticism perspective, maybe Melville was trying to show us something like we cannot disrespect nature like this because we are just a tiny little part of it, right? We are the weak, I don't know, the weak part of it. I don't know if we can think of it. But maybe that's a way, you can read it and not feel so bad about it. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, I know that back then, we're talking about 1850, right? It was natural to kill whales, to hunt whales. It was not prohibited like it is today. We didn't have animals being extincted, so it was not politically incorrect to do it. So yeah, that was their reality. But still, I think I'm going to read the beginning and then the end when Moby Dick kills them, and I'm gonna skip the middle
No.
when they kill the whales and big fishes on the way to find Moby Dick. And Lillian is laughing here. She agrees with me, right, Lillian? Yeah, let's skip the middle, beginning and end.
Right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'd take it. All right. So at least you have some contact with Melville and you see his beautiful writing. But this is a type of book, guys, that if you're into like highlighting passages, this is a book that you're gonna want to highlight a bit of every chapter. The narrative parts, the chapters that are more like philosophical and crazy, there are some things that you read there that I don't know, I feel seen by this book. So I'd give it a try, like try to do it because it's an experience.
Did he write any other books? I'm sorry if you said
A
that.
lot, yes,
Okay.
yes. Well, there's this short story that I mentioned, Billy Budd, right? There's also a one that's very hyped up right now, which is called Bartleby. Let me write on the chat. That is totally different. It's very short. Is I think like 200 pages long, which is about this guy who has a very red tape type of job, very bureaucratic job. And Melville wants to kind of make fun of those bureaucratic processes. And because Bartleby apparently doesn't really want to work, so he has this sentence that he keeps repeating, which is, I would prefer not to. So people ask him to do stuff and he says, oh, I would prefer not to. So it's kind of like on a more like satirical side than Moby Dick. And it's not such an endeavor, right? It's only like 200 pages. So
Yeah.
maybe you can start with that one.
Exactly. That sounds more like something I would read than 700 pages on
Nice.
killing whales. But it's a nice way
Okay.
to get to know his writing then.
Yeah, I
Thank you
think
so
so.
much. It
No
was
problem.
a great lecture as always.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and for listening to me like ramble about Moby Dick for an hour. Does anybody else have a question? All right, so I think we can stop here, right? What do you guys think? Okay. Thank you so much for coming, guys. And if you're into discussing literature, I think we could like start our own book club. And you guys are welcome to join me on the 31st of August. That's going to be the next talk about American literature. We're going to talk about the Harlem Renaissance, which was a movement in New York City. Of course, everything happens in New York City, but in the 1920s. So that would be really, really nice to see you then, okay? Thank you so much, guys.
Pessoal, obrigada pela presença de todo mundo aqui. Obrigada principalmente pela Talita, né, do tempo de estar aqui, Leandro.